Yay! Hey.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm very good. Yeah, I'm in Paris. Yes. How is Stockholm?
Yes, I'm coming live here from Stockholm. It's a fabulous November day with a little bit of sunshine. That's great. Speaking of where we are, it would be interesting. I'm curious to hear where our audience is calling in from, maybe from a physical location or maybe from a mental location. I'm good with either. Please share if you feel like it. I think we're going to kick off. What are we doing here today? Well, we're definitely experimenting with a LinkedIn Live to open up around some of the questions we're working on and perspectives that we've gathered and that we are really excited about at the moment. And I do think that I have some colleagues on here as well, so feel free to take lead on introducing yourselves in the chat if you feel like it. I really hope that some people might be walking and listening instead of watching. That would be great if that would be the case. Cool. It's coming in. Fantastic. All over. Look at that. So we're on the doorstep of the next generation computing platforms, aka some people call it this one of the world's the Metaverse. And as a provider of learning experiences, we are a player in this ecosystem, and we have a constant conversation and evidence gathering almost around what it means to be real world ready, so that we can update our curriculums with tools, perspectives, and challenges that allow people to join us and feel confident that they get exposed to an opportunity to stay ahead and be relevant. And who knows, it would be absolutely fantastic if our audience today wants to build on our conversation and add questions or perhaps question our ideas. In my wildest fantasy here, we could co-create some ideas on the future work maybe and business together with a wider audience. Okay, so I'm here today with Jonathan Briggs, co-founder of Hyper Island, self-proclaimed professional troublemaker, our global academic advisor, and someone who is very inspiring to me because of your curiosity to the max around digital, but also the world and people and our ability and your ability to communicate and make sense of things. You're an educator and a dear colleague, someone who challenges my thinking all the time, but always with warmth and humor. And you live in Singapore, but as we heard, you're now in Paris and you have a house connected full of IoT, I learned the other day, which is an interesting fun fact. But since I stole your introduction, you need to introduce me. I have a name and a fancy title, but what else?
Thank you, Helena. So Helena, I know you in lots of ways, but one of the things I did to prepare for this is to go and have a look back into your LinkedIn profile to see who you really were. We know you as our people leader and as our CEO. And over the last year, you just made an amazing difference to Hyper Island. You've done it for a little bit longer than that, really, though, because I've known you for 3 or 4 years at least at the moment. But I was interested to spot that you're really a hybrid of lots of different things. You were a system director at EF. And before that, you worked in supply chain strategy, retail and distribution, and did some volunteering for Médecins Sans Frontières. So a real mixture of wonderful different things, I think, brought together in your current role as my CEO and Hyper Island's CEO. And you've steered us through the pandemic, which I think is going to be something we need to just acknowledge here. For anybody watching a recording of this, we've just been hearing about new variants, the new Omicron variant is causing concern for us all. But I feel confident that we will steer our way through this, and looking forward to a conversation in that context.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Okay, let's not get off track now because of that. I thought we were going to do start with a check-in, typical Hyper Island style. And then the question for today is, what is one business transformation theme or need that has emerged in 2021 in your part of the world, if you wish? Perhaps something that you noticed with our clients. You go first, I go next.
Yeah, I've been having conversations with a couple of clients. I'm actually sitting at a client's offices here in central Paris. Fabulous offices for a fabulous brand. And one of the things that we're hearing, not just from them, but from other people we've talked to in the last few weeks and months, is the end-to-end nature of transformation at the moment. So lots of companies still recognizing their need to transform. Transformation often meant doing additional things in the past. So people would be thinking about, how do I do digital marketing or whatever. But today, I think what we're hearing much more is that the business needs to be transformed from soup to nuts. All right. In other words, the whole way through the business. And that means that people who haven't been involved with transformation are now getting involved with transformation. And I think, again, I'm going to pick this up later on, this idea of having to think about the whole system. What are you hearing? What have you heard about?
Yeah, I mean, I prompted the question and then I was thinking, okay, but let's from a leadership perspective in general, I'm sensing somehow, or maybe it's a feeling, but the rate at which priorities keep changing is going to accelerate even more towards the end or after this pandemic. I'm not really seeing any slowdown, so we better make sure as leaders that we bring people with us with some kind of transparency on the company backlog, so we need to commit to maintain curiosity somehow, because it's hard to be in that uncomfortable space of new and sometimes unknown challenges that are served to us. Let's put it lightly. Yeah. It's almost like the feeling of safe needs to get a new meaning and context, since we know that feeling challenged is what we need to be really good at dealing with. That's what came to my mind on the question. Yes, thanks for checking in. And that puts both and with our audience puts us in the mindset for what we'll be talking about. And I thought to first just acknowledge that 2021 has marked the 25th year of Hyper Island, and we came together as a company a few weeks ago to reflect on why we are here as humans, why we choose to spend our time here and not elsewhere. That was a beautiful session, and I thought to use this opportunity and ask you, Jonathan, because you've been part of this journey throughout the 25 years. And so I asked you to reflect a little bit on the context in which we all act and live in right now. Like today versus 25 years ago, what are some similarities and what is different? What thoughts do you have on that?
So it's amazing. 25 years. How can it possibly be 25 years? It's gone by in a flash.
Google was also founded 25 years ago. I love that.
I do. I know. Us and Google. I think the important thing is just to reflect on what we set out. So Lars Lund, David Eriksson, and I came together to create Hyper Island as something that I think we thought might exist for a couple of years at most. Right? But it had an idea inside it, and that was to bring together people from emerging industries that were being built around what we now call digital. At the time, we called it multimedia. But we said, look, there are lots of people in Sweden who are going to want to learn new skills in order to have opportunities for new jobs. We'd already seen 25 years ago, lots of people finding themselves without jobs. And so we said, look, we need to create something that's going to help people have jobs for the future. And this multimedia stuff, that sounded like a good thing to do. But when we thought about it, we said, look, we can already see that the technology is changing very, very fast. Let's not teach people about the technology. let's teach them to solve problems that are affected by the technology. And what they should do is they should grab the technology as it goes past. All right. In other words, they should think about things as they change. And so we didn't look at specific technologies. I mean, just remember, if we had, we'd have taught everybody to build kiosks and CD-ROMs. And how useful would that have been? So instead, what we did was we allowed the technology to change. And what we taught people to do was to be creative, to think about business, and to think about technology and think about people as technology changed. And it turns out that was very durable. It turns out that's something that seems to have persisted. And 25 years later, I think we're still doing the same thing. Now, one of the things that you and I, Helena, have been talking about is whether we are doing it enough. And I think later in our conversation, we'll get to the idea that perhaps, yes, I think in most respects, things have not changed. But I think if I go and listen to the companies around me, and I go and talk to students and potential students who come to our courses, I can see that the desire for coping with change is even bigger than it was 25 years ago. So that would be my starting point. It is the same, but if anything, it's the sound has got a bit louder, the needs have got a bit greater, and that's perhaps where we need to change too.
Interesting. I mean, a core value that has emerged or been articulated has been about empowering people to feel real world ready. And as we are living in the shift towards the next generation of computing platforms, I guess where digital and real will blend seamlessly. On one hand, what do you need to be real world ready? Like, on one hand, the answer is one Google search away, because it talks about lifelong learning skills, and they have been identified and articulated like, okay, critical thinking, problem solving, leadership, creativity, and they're super important for an individual's competitiveness and employability, but you can also argue that it enhances social inclusion, active citizenship, personal development, and so on. But I know you argue that the reality at the real world ready means that we need to be able to do stuff. Can you speak on that? What is it that we need to be able to do?
I'm what's called a constructionist. I believe we learn most when we do stuff. So if I go right back in my history, and I built a radio, all right, and it meant that when I listened to the radio, I sort of knew how a radio worked. Later in my life, I got involved with building bits of computing technology, and I've been building stuff all my life, and I feel very privileged to have done that. And when we started Hyper Island, we sort of said that's what people should do. They should build websites. They should build magazines. They should build later on they should build social networks or e-commerce or whatever it was. So by building stuff, you get to really understand it. You get to really understand all the parts of it. Mm-hmm. And I think we took that idea even further to say you don't have to build big things. You also need to build little things. You build models. You build lists of stuff. You make things in order to learn, and that I think is the sort of starting point for being real world ready.
But if I'd ask you to drill down on that, what are some general things, or what is it that we specifically need to be able to do?
I think people should be able to design experiments. So they should be able to think to themselves, okay, I can see some way of improving the world, my work, my personal life, or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to experiment. And then I'm actually going to do the experiment. I'm going to run the experiment. And I'm going to listen to the results. And I'm going to then reflect on the results and learn from that. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to suggest you do that on your own. Sometimes you're going to do it on your own. But the other big thing I think that we have pushed very hard over 25 years is the power of working in teams. So often creating can be quite lonely. if you've got a mountain to climb, it's much better to climb it with other people, to go and have that experience with other people, reflect on it together, and to understand it together. So that's part of the story. I was going to suggest that the other part is storytelling. We need to have these experiences, these making experiences. We need to do them with other people. And then we need to capture the stories from them, the lessons from them, and be able to tell those stories to other people, whether that is to create a business plan, or to make a pitch, or record a podcast, or an interview, or whatever. I think the communication piece is really, really important as well.
Has this a list of what we need to be able to do? In what way has it changed over the 25 years? Like, perhaps we just have more digital tools today, or like, what is the essence of what has changed in the story?
So I think the world has become a bit crunchier. Mean by that is it's actually a little bit harder to do stuff. I mean, we assume that we know that in some ways making has never been easier. If I'm a 22-year-old leaving college or university and I want to start a startup, I can go and start an e-commerce business. I can start a brand, or I can do stuff very, very easily and very, very cheaply. But while that side of the world has got easier and less expensive, and lots of people to help you, at the same time our problems are getting bigger. We've just been through a pandemic, or we're going through a pandemic. We can look at the sort of ecological problems we have. We can look at problems around privacy and trust and all these things. These problems are getting very, very big indeed. And so we actually need to create solutions. And while the tools are getting easier, the digital bits are getting easier, the problems are getting harder. So maybe there's a balance there. As I hinted at the beginning, I think that what we need to do, and what all of us, or everybody listening to this needs to do, is we need to be thinking in systems. We need to zoom out from the small things that we're dealing with and look at their impact on much bigger ideas and systems. We need to think about things end to end, and that's hard. We just start to think about modeling the interactions between systems. And a word that's come into play very strongly in Hyper Island over the last year is we need to push what we call transdisciplinary thinking. Now, what that means is that we need to stop thinking like an X, and think like lots of different things as well. I mean, one of the things I've been enjoying recently is reading a book about how to think like a spy, for example. How can we use the sorts of tools and ideas that people working for the intelligence services use? How would we compare that with thinking like an engineer? They're quite different. I mean, each profession comes with its own set of rules. It comes with its own set of tools, its own set of models. And I think one of the really exciting things that we've been able to do at Hyper Island is to start to get our learners out of their sort of straight line world, the world that they thought they were going to be in, and get them thinking in other people's worlds. And many of people watching this and will have come across the concept of design thinking. Design thinking is making sure you think like your customer and think about that. Well, I'm pushing beyond design thinking. I'm saying that it's no good if you want to solve big problems with digital just to think around your customer. You need to do that, but you also need to think about all the other people involved in the system that includes your problem. And that transdisciplinary thinking, I think, is one of the areas in which being real world ready has sort of become more complicated, become more difficult.
We have you talk about digital bravery as well. We have a piece coming out on that later this week. You say that everyone needs to step up here. What is that about?
Yeah, I need to be a little bit quiet because, you know, working with clients. But no, I think if I look at leaders, if I look at people who are at the top of an organization, I think they've bought into the idea that digital is now very important. But I think what they do is they tend to you know, pass the digital problems to other people in the organization. And digital bravery for me is to get everybody in the organization talking about and using and trying digital. Over the last 10 years, we've had some fantastic successes working with, you know, very, very senior people in very, very big companies, actually getting them making apps or getting them doing some you know, thinking about digital marketing or thinking about robotics or something like that. And I think digital bravery is about it's about having a go. It's about trying things out. And as the technology changes and gets harder, I think that you know, if you're going to really understand about artificial intelligence or really understand about what the hell is the metaverse, you're actually going to have to be in the metaverse. You're going to actually have to design some artificial intelligence for yourself. And if you don't do that, I'm not sure how you can lead in that particular field. It's as difficult as that. To lead, you're going to have done. And a few years ago, you know, we saw a big thing where people who worked in large companies would spend a day or a week back on the shop floor or back in the production department or back in a retail space or whatever. And I'm suggesting the same sort of bravery is needed in digital. People who are going to lead digital transformation in their organizations, they've got to get their hands dirty. They've got to actually see what, you know, what analytics feels like. They've got to see what you know, build a dashboard or whatever it is that they need to do that. But that sort of making mindset, but getting your hands dirty, feeling the pain that developers feel, feeling the, you know, the confusion and the barriers between users and developers. I think we need to get that feeling into lots of leaders, because only through that will they be able to lead the sorts of projects and changes that are going to solve some of the big problems in the world.
I think you just dropped a memorable quote there. I think you said to lead, you are going to have done. That was a pretty interesting one. I think it would be interesting to also ask the audience if do you sit on any examples where you're currently at or where you have been somehow that demonstrates digital bravery. Feel free to interpret what you heard and share some examples with us. That would be awesome to look at. All right, so as individuals, we might need to look for strategies for adopting lifelong learning skills, but we also need a lifelong learning mindset to keep going and stay ahead of the curve, if you wish. I guess a lifelong learning mindset is about that voluntary, self-motivated pursuit of knowledge. What do you say to those that don't feel self-motivated to constantly pursue new knowledge? Is this something you can practice, or are you born with it? Is it a yes or no thing?
It's not a yes or no thing. Yeah, I mean, I think you can learn to be more curious. All right, I think the human animal is you know, excited by novelty. They look around and they see things. Sometimes we're very lazy. I think our minds want to be very lazy, and what we do is we'll just accept what we see and just take it for granted that it's okay. I think the interesting thing is being able to dial up your curiosity, find ways of sensing the world more. All right, using digital and reading the news and talking to other people to discover what's really going on. All right, and it's a tiny little skill, but I think, you know, note making is increasingly important to people. We've got two habits that I think we've seen recently. One is that we now Google everything. So what we you know, we're listening to a piece of music or watching TV and something is mentioned, and we will go to Google and we'll check something out and ask something. But I think the corresponding piece is we should try and remember it. If we've gone to the effort of looking something up, we should make notes about it. So I think that we should do that, and we should also ask questions. All right. So don't take things at face value. Now, I'm asking people to spend time doing that, and I know time is at a premium for everybody. But I think that if you just get a little bit more into the habit of being curious and asking questions, the payoff is massive. Suddenly you're a more interesting person because you can talk about all sorts of stuff because you've sort of understood it and explored it. If I go back to discussions around leaders and leadership, I think confidence is often an issue. If I listen to some of the people, boardroom level people I've spoken to, what they assume is that young 25-year-old girl they've just hired, all right, that she's going to solve it, all right. So they don't have to do it anymore. It's there, they pass the problem down to somebody else who's going to solve it. And I think we need to encourage people to go, no, why solve it together? Yeah, that super new hire, she's really bright and she's going to help you. But why not solve it together so that you know it as well as them? I think the other thing we notice is that it's a little bit like getting fit or changing a habit. Is this has to become a habit? You often hit a wall. So you'll start doing something and you'll say, look, yeah, I'm going to read the tech news. I'm going to do something on a regular basis. And then very quickly it falls by the wayside. Or it just gets too difficult and therefore you let it go. And I think one of the things we encourage at Hyper Island is for people to keep going. I mean, don't stop being curious. Being curious isn't something you do only on holiday. Keep going. And I think the final thing I suppose comes to mind at the moment is be much better with failure. Now, if I listen to leaders, people are getting more risk taking, but as soon as something goes wrong, they want to bury that. They want to pretend it didn't happen. They certainly want to celebrate it. And I think we've got to get into a mindset of celebrating failure. Hey, had to go, all right. And what we need to do is learn from failure so that you don't have to repeat this failure over and over again. So those are the pieces of lifelong learning I really feel strongly about.
It's interesting because I keep coming back to, if you listen to really great artists that are known to the world, I mean the big names, all of them bear witness on how many times they were rejected and there was pushback and they just have to keep going. So for me, that's my mental model for how I think about the rejection or failure or something. We just have to, okay, it didn't work. We have to keep going.
I think Helena, I think there's also a problem, which is that when we see success in the world, we often assume that success is because of the person that we are seeing. So we look at Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or Tim Cook or whoever, and we say the reason they are a success is because of who they are. I think often their success is as accidental as somebody's failure. I think they're brilliant. They've capitalized on what they've done. They've built on their success. But I don't think they weren't necessarily special people. They weren't necessarily. I think we can all succeed, and what we need to be doing is practicing and tuning up our creativity and our curiousness, so that we can have a bigger impact, bigger impact as a leader, and better impact as a maker and doer.
Yeah, I have a 10-year-old kid at home who recently tried to blame his English teacher for failing an English test. So he claimed it wasn't his fault because the teacher didn't explain the verb to have so that he understood. And so my response was pretty immediate and a bit too tough maybe, but I said, dear kid, your teacher's job is to expose you to the opportunity to learn, but it's your job to make sure you get it. Now, how do you need help? And then, we took it from there. Yeah, why am I
was
saying
going to
this?
say, just fundamentally, I mean, this is at the heart of the Hyper Island dilemma. Okay,
I'm indoctrinated.
What is the role of the Hyper Island teacher? Okay, when we started 25 years ago, we said we didn't have any teachers, we didn't have any books, and we were slightly true, but what we really meant was we didn't have conventional teachers. Instead, what we had were facilitators, and I think I'd like to pay tribute to all the people at Hyper Island who've ever facilitated anything, because facilitation is a super hard thing to practice. But what facilitation is, for anybody listening who doesn't really understand, is that instead of a teacher, you become a co-learner. And what you do is you learn with the people you're working on, all right, working with, and you solve the problem together. Now, yes, you have all sorts of teachery skills, like asking interesting questions and pushing people forward and motivating them or whatever. But fundamentally, Hyper Island has never been about pouring knowledge into people. What it is, it's about creating an environment, just like your English teacher example for your kid.
Exactly, but I think what I want to get to is that there is a massive need of reskilling and upskilling out there. And by now, I'd be surprised if there is a single company out there that has not identified that this is a thing. But I think what I wanted to get at was like the business perspective in here, and to talk about whose job is it to make sure that people in organizations stay ahead. What would you say on that?
So I think everybody has a part to play. All right. I mean, let's look at some of the people who need to be part of it. I mean, I think the people who've traditionally been given the role inside organizations at HR, what they need to do is to promise to bring in real diversity. I think lots of companies, they hire themselves again, and I think real diversity of background, diversity of attitude, diversity in every possible way, I think is going to be super important. You need to hire the detective, you need to hire the journalist, you need to hire the filmmaker into an organization, whatever that organization happens to be, rather than saying, okay, what we're doing is looking for yet another UX person, so we hire just another UX person. Go for diversity, go for contrarians, go for people who are going to cause some friction in your organization, because that creates growth, it creates opportunity. I think if it's handled well. I think similarly at the IT departments. I mean, my background is in IT. Your background is in IT. I now realize, and I think the IT departments. I mean, you go into lots of organizations, and IT is an empire. It's an empire with a private language, with control over everybody's lives, and it's a crumbling empire, because today's IT is much more a combination of the user and the cloud, and where does company IT sit? Company IT is a really uncomfortable place. So I think there's a huge role for company IT. It just isn't the role they've traditionally played. It's not someone to come and plug your machine in for you. It's someone to help the organization become technology ready, and someone to help explain things and storytell around that. And then I just mentioned facilitators. I think leaders need to be facilitators. They need to give people autonomy, all right, in order to be able to do that. They need to align that autonomy so that everybody understands where the company is going. But I think leadership is really hard. But I think if you change the role to one of a facilitator and not an expert, if you think about being, if you're suddenly hit with a pandemic, you don't know the answers, but you could help people facilitate trying to solve things in the short term. I think the other thing that you say, the boards of organizations, they have a lot of responsibility. they have a lot of responsibility to listen to their organizations and realize that the organizations do need to change. And over the last 10 years, when I've been living in Asia, we've worked with some really, really fantastic companies. And I think they've had bravery in that they've realized that they need to change, even when they're doing super well. So, there are examples of companies that have been at the top of their game. They've still realized that they need to change. They need to transform themselves digitally, because they can see that just over the horizon, there's stuff that's going to come and bite them if they don't do that.
Wow. And I'm standing here thinking about the metaverse and the value chain, and the first layer, or the external layer, which is about the experience. And what if jobs were created as an experience instead of, you're responsible for this area? We're not going to get there in a while, but then, and leadership would be to facilitate that experience towards a certain impact. I guess reality, to some extent, is different in many places. I mean, how do you suggest we tackle the feeling of being short of time that we all battle with? I can only focus on a few things, and this is certainly not on the highest of my agenda. Like, how do we just tackle time? We need to stop doing certain things, I guess.
Definitely. Wow, that's such a big question to unpack. So, how do we tackle time? I mean, as soon as you start talking about the metaverse, you're not only tackling time, you're also tackling space.
Yeah.
Right? So both of those. Let me come back to the metaverse in a minute. But I think you're right. I think stopping doing stuff is going to be very important to organizations. I think the first thing I would stop, or ask people to stop, is being so certain. We're seeing horrible polarization in the world at the moment, and it's people who are certain about stuff. And I think certainty is, I think, a big danger. That we're living in a time of change. Maybe we've always lived in a time of change, but this one, the change seems particularly acute. And I think what we've got to do is be observers and participants, and not just judge and say, look, this is true or not true or whatever. I think we just need to be a little bit more fluid about that. I think that we need to help our organizations genuinely change, and not just use the language of change. I think often in organizations you'll hear people talk about being agile, or talk about doing sprints, for example. And I think actually often that you don't feel they've actually looked at what being agile has meant in other industries. And what they're doing is they're just labeling it, which, work really fast on this project so you can do it in a shorter time, rather than any sort of real agile. So we need to get people to stop just using the language and start actually doing things. I think we need to stop waste. I think often what we need to be doing is finding ways of driving waste out of our organization. And I recommend any organization doing an audit of what are we wasting our time on? What is it we shouldn't be doing? And we can learn from lots of the big digital companies about how they are removing waste and how they're prioritizing things. And I think that's there. And I think, from our own point of view, Helena, I think imagining that you're going to fix all the problems with a 60-minute micro learning activity or a 2-day training course. What I hope we do, and what I know we do, is to start people on journeys. We are a journey starter. We'll be there if you want after the journey starts. But imagine that change is a long process, not a short one. I was reminded of this the other day when I was asked about one of our clients in Singapore about how long it had taken to implement digital transformation. And they said, well, we started 9 years ago and we haven't finished yet. So this idea of time is also about being realistic, that you're not going to change people by putting them on a 2-day anything course. But what you can do, particularly if you choose a good course, is to find a course that's going to kick people into starting a behavior change or starting a way of thinking change that is going to have an impact, not just 2 days later, but 2 months later, 2 years later, and and beyond.
And it makes me thinking of the finite and infinite mindset, and a little bit of that game theory as well. What are we playing here? It's not going to be done by tomorrow. We might have shifted a few things, but there is a long journey ahead where people can come and go. I'd like to actually try to be spontaneous, because I saw a question here that I'd like to address, and it is there. How much do we currently know about the fact that there are already conversations happening that brands land building? Am I articulating this correct? That brands land building, and all we see in real world will have the possibility of ownership in the metaverse as well.
Yeah. Huge question, Butrint. Thank you very much for it. I mean, I think let's unpack a little bit about what we think we mean by the metaverse. All right. So what I think is exciting is not what Mark Zuckerberg of Meta has said, or what people are getting excited about in terms of VR, whatever. That's all really exciting, but that's not, I think, where the big changes happen. I think the big changes happen when everybody on the planet has access to tools that allow them to add layers of information, layers of data, and communication tools over and above the real world. I got very excited recently by some of the things that Niantic is doing. Now, you'll know Niantic as the company behind Pokemon Go. Fascinating what they are currently doing, which is not just to provide people with games and not just to provide the platforms that allow other developers to write games, but I think looking at how they acquire information from the physical world so that your device, your mobile phone, or maybe a headset, maybe your earpods or whatever it is, are aware of where you are in space and what you can do and think about in space. And so for me, the metaverse is about it's about adding layers of information, layers of data onto the real world. It's about how you make the real world better. So we're talking about real world ready. I think this is real world ready for a better real world, which is one in which you've got augmentation, and that augmentation is what other people have called the metaverse. That's the bit that really excites me. So the question is, what happens to brands in that world? And funnily enough, the questioner doesn't know this, but that's exactly the sort of conversation that I'm having with the brand I'm working with here in Paris. It's how do we use the real and the digital world in order to create better brand stories and better brand experiences for the consumer. Now, you're not just doing it because you want better brand stuff. You're doing it because the consumer gets more delight, more value out of that. And we're on that journey. I think if you go onto TikTok or LinkedIn or any of the social media, you'll see people who are doing stuff in digital about brands, sometimes that adds values to the brand. As we add these layers of augmentation, as we move towards the metaverse, I think we'll have new ways of doing that. And I can't wait to start building those sorts of things and working with our students and our learners in order to be able to do that. But I don't, I don't know what the impact will be. Butrint's question was, what will the impact be? I don't know what the impact will be. That's what makes it so exciting. It's going into this without knowing what will actually happen. And, I think we need to do that.
Fantastic. I started today's conversation by saying we are experimenting with LinkedIn Live today. We've been a little bit all over the place here. Metaverse, real world ready, better ready for a better world. I'd love if you have the time and if you want to give us any type of little feedback. What do you bring with you in the audience from today? And if you have ideas for what type of point of view you'd like to hear from us, please share it. If you have time, that would be fantastic, and we promise to get back. Time flies, and we're getting close to not only this session, but also the end of 2021, Hyper Island's 25th year. And I thought we'll end it with a proper checkout, you and I here, and by sharing, what would you like to leave behind in 2021, and what do you carry forward into 2022?
Give me 2 minutes. You go first. I'll answer it. I've got an idea, but
yeah. Okay. I mean, there are so many colleagues that I just want to meet in real life now. So I'm happy to leave the all remote state behind, and I'll carry forward into 2022 a continued ambition and excitement to accelerate our impact and keep the conversation going. So that's my checkout for today. What about you?
Thank you, Helena. I think we have to leave behind fear. I think one of the things that COVID has done is it's made a lot of us very fearful, and it's added to a fear that's already there. So I think we have to leave behind fear, and we need to replace it with bravery. We need to pray. Things can be done better. It is up to us, and we need to use this amazing technology and all the people we work with, whatever, to make things better. And that's so. Leave behind fear, embrace bravery. That's what I would do.
Fantastic. This is the point where I would have loved for this to be Zoom, because I could have seen everybody and all of that. But I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day if you're just woken up, or good night if this was the last thing you did today. And we hope to see you soon again. Let's try this channel again. We're veterans now.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you, Helena, for some interesting questions.
Yay, thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.